Every single one of us has beliefs about marriage that just aren't true. So today we're going to be talking about some of these marriage myths and busting them wide open. But before we dive in today, I want to ask you a question. As you listen to this episode, I want you to think about the messages you've absorbed about marriage, things you've heard growing up, things you picked up from your culture, society around you, social media, movies, and yes, even church. And there's one question I'd love for you to answer in the comments. What belief about marriage did you used to think was true, but once you got married, you realized wasn't? Share it with us, please. And who knows, maybe it'll be the future episode on this podcast. But I want every comment because, again, these comments help shape what I give you in the future. So let's dive in. Let's talk about some of these marriage myths that we really need to put out to pasture. Welcome back to the High Ticket Woman. I'm Debbie Caudle. And today we're going to do, as I said, a little marriage myth busting. Not heavy stuff. Just we're going to keep it lighthearted today. No crisis conversations. We're just going to talk about three common ideas about love and marriage that sound good on paper, but they don't actually hold up in real life. Because honestly, a lot of the frustration that we feel in marriage doesn't come from our spouse, believe it or not. It comes from the expectations we had that were never realistic to begin with. So let's dive into the first one. I'm going to call this one myth number one. If we disagree, that means we're incompatible. This belief, this false belief, it creates more unnecessary panic in marriages than most anything else. Because somewhere along the way, we've absorbed the idea that if we were really meant for each other, we would always agree and get along. So then when disagreements show up about whatever, and they will show up, money, parenting, schedules, boundaries, sex, we start thinking, "Uh-oh, maybe I married the wrong person." But you know what? Disagreement is not incompatibility. It's two perspectives colliding, and that's going to happen in marriage. Healthy couples disagree. Unhealthy couples avoid conflict. Have you ever just really sort of stopped and thought about that? Disagreement just simply means that you think differently from your spouse. That's okay. You're not going to be clones of each other. You value different things than your spouse. Now, we're not talking about the big, gigantic values that shape who you are. The more you have those in common, the better. But there are going to be small things that you value that are different. That's normal. And you're going to notice different details in what you pay attention to versus what your spouse pays attention to. You're going to prioritize things differently than your spouse. And none of that means that your marriage is broken or flawed in any way. The problem isn't that you disagree. The problem is in how you handle the disagreement. Do you expect your spouse to just be like you in every decision? And do you get defensive when your spouse doesn't respond the way you would or see things the way you would? Filter life through the same lens that you have? Do you then shut down or escalate? Your temper rises quickly. You see red, and before you know it, you're screaming at the top of your lungs. Do you keep score on who won more arguments and who lost more? Or do you work towards understanding these differences? Compatibility isn't about thinking the same way about things. If you came to me and you said, "We never disagree," my spouse, my husband, my wife we always see eye to eye, I would actually be concerned about your marriage because that would suggest to me that somebody's opinion, somebody's perspective is getting overpowered, swallowed up by the others. The healthy marriages aren't absent of disagreements and the occasional argument. The healthy marriages are about learning how to stay connected even though we think differently. Jeff and I think differently about a number of things, but again, they are small things. I might wanna do certain things around the house differently. He's a romantic, but I'm definitely more of a romantic than he is. So I see life and our marriage through a more romantic lens. He sees life through a more practical lens. And I love that about him. That's not something that I wanna change, but it is something that we need to understand about each other and appreciate and respect. Now, if I came into this marriage thinking that my perspective is the only way to see things, and then he doesn't show up in that way, and I'm disappointed by that, you can imagine how that begins to break down communication. And that's just one example of how expecting our spouse to be just like us is really unhealthy, really detrimental. Now let's jump to myth number 2, and that dovetails really well into, after this first myth, and this one I'm gonna call "A good marriage should be effortless." And, being the romantic that I am, this one sounds good, but it's dangerous. It really actually, in a quiet sort of way, can really destroy marriages. Because this idea that love should be easy, natural, and effortless, it sets us up for disappointment the moment life gets real. I work with a number of couples who think that because they no longer feel in love anymore, that again, they've married the wrong person. Well, let's just stop and pause and think about this for a second. When you are in love, which is a purely emotional experience that is a result of natural chemicals flowing through your body, that purely emotional response sets us up to think that the rest of our lives is going to be like that. It's not. Marriage isn't a marriage that lasts and a marriage that is healthy is rooted in something far deeper than that initial emotional response. That's what starts the relationship, that's what gets it off the ground, but what's going to keep it up in the cloud, where you want it to be, or, I mean, I'm using a metaphor here that maybe, um, could be switched. Some people would say, "No, I want my marriage on the ground." But, when I think of as a romantic, I think of, you know you know, passionate, exciting, you know, as the when I th when I think about being in the clouds, I think of just, you know, above the ordinary. So maybe we'll talk about it that way. When I think about marriage that way, and I think about the falling in love experience, the idea that that's what all of marriage is going to be here on out is dangerous because, again, that's what starts a relationship, it's not what sustains it. The truth is marriage requires effort. You've got to be rooted in something deeper than just the initial exciting, chemistry-driven feelings that started you off, right? And marriage is like anything else that is important to you and meaningful to you. It requires effort, not constant struggle, I'm not saying that. It shouldn't be something that you're constantly in battle and fighting over, and I'm not saying that you should be unhappy and miserable most of the time, not at all. I think marriage should be filled with joy and happiness, and you're totally capable of having that. What I am actually saying is marriage requires intentional care. Think about anything else in your life that's important to you. Your career. You don't just walk into the job of your dreams or the career of your dreams by accident. Most of us don't. It's intentional step by intentional step by intentional step that moves you along the path that you want to go. Same thing with friendships. You don't move from I don't know you to you are my best friend overnight. It's intentional effort to get to know each other, spend time with each other, and stay connected. Parenting. We don't produce amazing children by just giving birth to them. It's intentional effort to discipline ourselves and discipline our children and raise them with the set of core values that we want them to have. Take anything, your health, your faith, anything that is meaningful in your life is going to require intentional effort. So, why would marriage be the one area of your life that magically runs itself? It's not. And again, effort doesn't mean that something's wrong. Effort means that, you're actually paying attention to your marriage. You notice when there's emotional drift. You respond to tension. You don't just ignore it. You don't just sweep issues under the rug and once you've calmed down, go, okay, well, I don't want to fight again, so I'm not going to talk about this. But it doesn't ever really go away because you never really got closure on that. No, intentional effort means you address small things before they become big things. So effort isn't a sign that you married the wrong person. It's a sign that you're invested and that you recognize that we've shifted from the chemical attraction to something that requires us to put down those roots and weed our marital garden because weeds will pop up. We don't just plant the seeds and then sit back and go, okay, well, we're done. It's going to be beautiful here on out. Doesn't work that way. Now, let's just pause for a minute because if you're realizing that some of the frustration in your marriage, yeah, has less to do with your spouse and maybe more to do with your unrealistic expectations, maybe you have been resting on the laurels of that feeling of being in love and thinking that that would just continue on in the marriage. And now it feels like work and it feels like something's wrong as a result. Well, this is exactly the kind of work that we do in my Marriage in Bloom high touch marriage intensive. This is where we bust those myths up, right? And we get clarity and honesty about what your expectations were coming into this relationship, whether they were realistic or unrealistic, and how to communicate through the differences, not ignore the differences, but to understand and appreciate and respect those differences and build a marriage that's grounded in reality, not pressure or perfection. I have nothing wrong with striving to be perfect, but to put an unrealistic expectation on your marriage isn't helping you or your spouse. So you can learn more about this at my website, debbiecaudle.com/marriage and bloom. Be sure to add the marriage and bloom part because if you just go to debbiecaudle.com, you won't see anything there that actually talks about the and bloom program. So debbiecaudle.com/marriage and bloom. All right, let's look at one more myth. And that's we should want to do everything together. Now, Jeff and I have been married about 5.5 years, and we do love doing a lot of things together. Grocery shopping, running errands, a lot of things. And we were really, especially this way when we were first married. We've backed off a tiny bit from this, but not a lot. But I still think that we need to address this because there's a right way and a wrong way to think about this. So this idea that we should want to do everything together, it sounds sweet, but it can cause resentment. Eh, So let's talk about how that happens. Sometimes we absorb the idea that Being close to each other, emotionally close, means that we have to share all the same hobbies, have all the same interests, share all the same preferences, share everything. So if one of you wants time alone and the other enjoys doing something, at a certain time of day, when that's the time of day that you want downtime, it can get in the way, right? Or if you like doing something that your spouse doesn't like doing, it can feel a little threatening. So we can start to ask ourselves, are we drifting apart? Why don't they want to be with me? When Jeff and I were first married, because we have both been married before, obviously we came into this marriage with certain patterns of behavior that had carried over from our first marriages. And my first husband is quite the extrovert, but Jeff's the opposite. He's an introvert. And so I had to adjust to Jeff wanting and needing some alone time in the evening. That was obviously part of his pattern before he married me. Then in the evenings he would get on his computer and read, catch up on the news and, you know, do some of his investment and trading, stuff on the computer. And so but I was used to that being time to connect. So it took me a little while to not wonder and question why Jeff didn't want to be with me. But I realized pretty early on that if I just gave him the space to do that, that within a short amount of time, he was circling back to me and just as loving and affectionate as he always was. So I realized that I needed to reframe how I was viewing that in my brain. This isn't Jeff pulling away from me. This isn't Jeff not wanting to be with me. This is Jeff just being Jeff. And if I give him space to be himself, everything's fine, right? Marriage isn't about merging into the same person. He can do things that work for him, and I can do things that work for me. And we can come back together and still be intentional about connecting. We are two whole people with independent interests and likes, not two half people clinging to each other for identity. And I think this one is really key because sometimes we marry for the wrong reason. Sometimes we marry to validate our sense of worth. I need someone to love me and want to be with me so that I can feel whole. You were already whole when you married. You weren't a half person and you didn't need to get married to feel whole. And if that is why you married, then this myth, okay, that you have to do everything together may show up in your marriage because you've now attached meaning to us doing everything together that isn't accurate and isn't benefiting the marriage. Here's a more realistic picture of what healthy independence looks like. All right. I like to work out uh, and go to the gym. And sometimes Jeff wants to go with me, and sometimes he doesn't. Sometimes because of the nature of his work early in the morning, sometimes he's exhausted. He comes home right about the time that I want to go to the gym, and he doesn't always feel like going to the gym with me. Okay. I could I could make a big stink out of that. I could go, "You need to go to the gym. You're at that age. Your body needs it, and this is a good time for us to connect. We've got a 20-minute drive there and a 20-minute drive back, and how could you not wanna be with me? This is one of the best times of the day for us to be together." But I don't do that to him. I don't force sameness. There are rhythms that need to happen in each marriage, and we need to let those rhythms exist. Some people like to do things early in the morning, others prefer a slow start to the day, coffee, quiet, reflection. We shouldn't guilt each other for having those different rhythms, and we shouldn't interpret that as rejection. You can intentionally connect at other times later in the day. Jeff and I like to take walks. We don't actually eat that many meals together. We're odd in this way. Our schedules really don't align Monday through Friday to do breakfast, lunch, or dinner together. So The only 2 meals Jeff and I get really together are Saturday brunch and Sunday brunch, and sometimes we only get one of those. So, if we had both come into this marriage going, "We must have meals together or there's something wrong with us," well, we'd be in trouble, okay? So, thankfully, neither of us attached that belief to that different rhythm that we have in our marriage. But we find lots of times to connect, times that we agree on, times that we've chosen together, not just assumed, again, coming into the relationship. We may be odd compared to other couples, but we are not separate. And our days and our times together overlap in many ways that are unique to us. And that's what healthy independence is and isn't. You can have personal interests. You can maintain friendships that existed before the marriage. You can enjoy time alone. You can bring your full self into the marriage and not lose it without having to avoid your spouse, without living a completely separate life. You don't have to go on vacations independently. You don't have to have space to disengage. The goal isn't distance, the goal is connection while still being who you are. Because you see, constant togetherness actually backfires. When you're always together and when you expect to always be together, individuality can shrink. There's always one dominant person and one more passive person in the relationship. The passive person is the one that gets the short end of the stick. They're always swallowing down themselves to accommodate the other person. And so the dominant person might put more pressure on their spouse. And then resentment grows internally in the person who's more passive. And here's the thing about passivity. You're only swallowing down for so long, and then at some point you're going to start expressing how you really feel and what you really want in the marriage. But how many years have gone by in the meantime? And what do you look like now when you do finally start speaking out and saying what you haven't been happy with for years and years and years? And then authenticity gets lost and you stop choosing each other, partly because you've never been apart enough to choose. So remember, the real goal isn't sameness. We've got to do everything and be everything the same. No, the goal is intentionality, togetherness that's intentional, shared time that's meaningful, choosing time to come together, but respecting each other's individual space as well. Your marriage thrives when you overlap. A big part of your individuality overlaps, not just a tiny little sliver, and your values align and your connection is prioritized, but also your individuality is honored. There's room and space for you both to be different. That's not drifting apart, that's maturity, right? Now, why do we have these myths? I mean, they're so common, aren't they? Well, we have them because they're easy, they're simple to cling to. Truth is, reality is a lot more nuanced. But marriage isn't meant to be a fantasy. It's meant to be the formation of two people coming together and creating something new. So when you replace myths with reality and truth, then there's less pressure on your marriage, less fear, more curiosity, more emotional safety, more patience with each other. You stop asking, is there something wrong? And you start asking, how do we change this and how do we grow through this? And that's exactly what we want. So before we end today, remember I'd love to hear from you. Which of these marriage myths did you believe early on in your marriage and how has your perspective changed over time? Leave a comment, subscribe, share this episode. Someone out there needs a little bit of relief from their own unrealistic expectations. And if these myths have been quietly shaping tension in your marriage, please reach out. This is exactly what we unpack inside Marriage in Bloom. It's it's where we learn to build connection that's rooted in truth and honesty, not pressure to conform, not pressure to be identical to each other. So remember debbiecaudle.com/marriage in bloom. And remember, it's not perfection that we're trying to attain. It's the desire to be coachable and teachable, to focus on what you have full control over, which is you. I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me today.